Fanny Moreau, a French woman living in Paris, is walking along a street strolling to her work when she runs into Alain Aubert, her high school friend. She walks past him, but he later recognizes her and goes up to her to remind her of her past. He has to keep on walking if he wants to get to his workspace, but as he says, his profession allows him to choose his own hours. And so, as the two engage in a lengthy conversation, we learn a lot about both. While living in New York, they studied at a French school together. They weren't best friends, but as we soon understood, Alain was crazy about her. He doesn't hide this fact now, and to be frank, he is so happy to see her that the feelings of the past must be surfacing from the depths of his memory in this moment. Fanny is now married to a man who works here in Paris. Her job is at an auctioneer, and before they arrive at the auction's door, she seems to be glad to run into Alain too. He used to write articles in the school newspaper, and she remembers how they were the only articles worth reading. Finally, Alain happily notices how close Fanny's workspace is to his home. He's writing a book, and will be a resident here for quite a while. Before they split ways, Fanny agrees to have a coffee with him soon to remember their childhood. Her day starts out great. Her husband, Mark, is an extremely rich man. That evening, they are preparing to go to a glamorous event. Mark is planning to move to the countryside for a while after that, to rest and enjoy the upcoming wonderful weather. Seeing Fanny dressed up makes him childishly excited. We wonder whether he appreciates Fanny in this manner when she's not at her best. Mark just cannot wait to enter the party alongside her and see the envious faces of his fellow friends. He gifts Fanny a piece of expensive jewelry, so much so that Fanny refuses to wear it at first. This kind of ring doesn't fit into her character at all, and furthermore, she prefers to stay in the city rather than sit at their countryside home alone while Mark goes on one of his lengthy hunting trips. The latter, however, is like an adult boy, so in the end, thanks to his stubbornness, Fanny puts on the ring and stops arguing about leaving the city. Their communication is overall positive, but a serious underlying conflict is shown in the way they speak with each other. Jean's colleagues engage in a lengthy conversation about his character after the couple makes their entrance. A variety of hypotheses are expressed concerning both Fanny and her husband. Naturally, they are just gossiping without pointing out any solid arguments, but they seem to view Fanny as Jean's trophy wife, while considering Jean quite a shadowy person. One of his associates passed away while in a forest with him. They say he drowned, but his passing meant a lot of success to Jean, so connecting the two seems to be a source of great amusement for the company. Later that evening, to endure the boring atmosphere, she shares how her day began with one of her friends, Julia. The meeting with Alain rekindled the memories of the best part of her life. She was happy in New York, and if, while living there, Alain had come up to her and confessed his love, her life would have probably been completely different today. Spending time with this extravagant, backstabbing, and two-faced society, she is left dreaming about what it would have been like if she ended up with Alain rather than Jean. Of course, this is just a thought. Their country house looks extraordinary in the early autumn. The deer hunting goes well, but everything about the trip is boring. The part during which Fanny is constantly asked about Jean's work is the most annoying. To be frank, Fanny herself isn't so sure as to what her husband does. His own explanation, that he helps rich people get even richer with the help of mostly legal methods, isn't enough. The next afternoon, Alain calls Fanny at work, and the two agree to have lunch together. They spend time in a park, remembering the memories that seemed lost, as Alain continues to talk about his obsession with her in high school. He even chose his ex-wife based on the fact that she reminded him of Fanny. The latter is a little embarrassed, but Alain's compliments mean that she still cannot help but be flattered. Fanny reveals to him afterwards that she divorced once before marrying Jean too. They talk a little bit about the latter too, and for now, Alain doesn't show his hatred. The fact that she's married to some other guy is a bitter irony of life to him, and this is exactly the subject of the book he's currently working on. The lunch goes great. The connection between them is evident, and they decide to keep this friendship running in the future. Later that evening, Fanny's mother Susan pays the married couple a visit. She seems to have a great relationship with both. While having dinner at a restaurant, their friends walk past them, and together they quickly plan an impromptu, small, and sublime trip to Polynesia. Jean's possessiveness shows itself then, as he points out how much he hates one of them, the man who is clearly gazing at Fanny with a kind of seductive look. Fanny seems to be aware of Jean's jealousy. Later that night, she complained lightly about him with Suzanne, but the latter seemed to look at everything from Jean's perspective. She's almost predisposed to justify everything he might be doing wrong. The subject of their argument walks into the room and steals Suzanne away to show her something he recently bought. One might expect something extraordinary, but instead we see that it is just an expensive toy that reflects his childhood memories. The story he conveys to her then shows Jean in a completely different light. He seems to have been used to climbing trains when he was a kid and traveling on unknown grounds. Terrified, he would go through dark tunnels and come out of them with a changed view of life and of himself. Fanny is wearing a turtleneck in the next scene as she walks in a park together with Alain. It mustn't be a coincidence, since she knows that the thing Alain remembers the most about the Fanny of the past is a turtleneck and a nerdy look. Just as before, he keeps talking about the way he used to feel about her. He believes in chances, and the coincidence that has brought him to Fanny is particularly precious to him. The time flies, and their friendship strengthens. It all gets to a point where Fanny agrees to eat at his apartment, since it is clearly going to rain outside. Together, they buy ingredients first and head to his sunny place. While Elaine cooks, they share some more intricate details about their lives. Elaine seems to be ingrained in quite a bohemian lifestyle, living wherever he wants and writing his life away. When he puts spaghetti on the table, he mentions the happy coincidence once more and holds her hand softly. Fanny is confused. She takes her hand back and reminds him of her situation. Elaine must have gotten the wrong idea about what was going on between them. She's happily married. When Jean appeared in her life, it was a complete mess, and he is the reason why she's happy today. He takes care of her, spoils her, and loves her, and for this reason, she loves him back. Or at least, she used to think this way. After the fateful meeting with Elaine, he and their afternoon walks are all she can think about. And perhaps this is the reason why she doesn't go against it when the latter stands up, approaches her, and kisses her firmly. She is questioned by Jean in the next scene about why she didn't answer the phone today. Despite the unending objections, however, she manages to satisfy his all-encompassing curiosity. Fanny feels something burn in her heart then. She doesn't know what it is or how she should react, so instinctively she calls Elaine without even thinking about what she will say. The man on the other side of the line, however, doesn't need a clear subject of conversation in order to be happy to hear her voice. Fanny is his first love, and the dream has come true for him. Feelings of guilt follow her through another one of her dates in the following scene. But Elaine, with his clever way with words and with his passionate way of thinking, assures her that life is a jackpot already won and she should not waste it away. Instead, she should make all of it count. To demonstrate this, he even buys her a lottery ticket. This seems to work at first, but Fanny's anxiety still keeps on increasing until it becomes unbearable. Instead of letting this secret eat away at her inner being, Fanny decides to share it with somebody. She breaks the news to Julia, who seems to be extremely surprised after hearing that the perfect couple of Fanny and Jean was nothing but a facade. Still, she advises her to leave Elaine as soon as possible before he ruins her marriage. Unfortunately for Fanny, this isn't what she wants to hear, so instead of decreasing, her anxiety keeps on growing. She is looking at the lottery ticket in the following scene, smiling at the reminiscence it brings when Jean catches her in this state. Quickly, she hides the ticket behind her back, but Jean already knows she's hiding something. Thanks to his insecurity, he fails to let it go, so Fanny has to reveal the ticket in the end. Jean pretends to be amused. He acts as if he doesn't suspect anything more serious is going on. He's only a little hurt because Fanny tried to hide it from him. Still, the calls to her office become more frequent, as Fanny starts to scan the streets of Paris more attentively while eating out with Elaine. Jean calls her cell phone, and we see that the man is clearly suspecting something. That night, while taking a shower, her phone rings and Jean is the one answering. It must be Elaine calling, since after saying hello, Jean hears nothing back from the other side of the line. His suspicions are rising now. In Fanny's mind, however, Jean is clueless, and she continues to swim in the ocean of growing romance with Elaine. Her lover starts thinking about the future. He came to Paris temporarily for work, but now thanks to her, he is looking forward to staying. This clearly means that he is serious about this relationship, and the pressure on Fanny becomes more intense. Elaine, however, understands this immediately and adds that he's not pushing her to make a decision. He only wants her to know that he is here, in case she changes her mind about her marriage. Meanwhile, Jean goes to a private detective's office and says that he wants an investigation to be conducted on her wife. He suspects she is cheating, and the detective, who clearly seems to know his business, gives him a disclaimer first. Sometimes, the infidelity is so strong and so meaningless that it doesn't get in the way of a functioning relationship. In that case, one might say that it is even better for a man not to know the truth about his cheating wife. If, however, Jean still decides to move forward, he will have his truth very soon. Despite a quick and abrupt change in her expression, the latter says he wants the investigation to begin. And so, everything will change soon. Jean's birthday comes then, and nothing seems to get his thoughts away from jealousy. His suspicions are so strong, and the emotion they bring is so overwhelming that he fails to hide it in conversations with his friends. For the first time, he seems like a dangerous man. A detective named Josephine quickly finds out all about Fanny's affair shortly after. She even collects evidence that is presented to Jean in the next scene. It is an audio file in which Fanny is talking to Elaine about her relationship with Jean. She seems to be looking forward to a divorce. Jean is extremely hurt, but he presses his desperation down and asks to be told more about Fanny's lover's identity. After returning home, he pretends not to know anything about the affair and calls one of his friends, who seems to be a martial arts trainer. He wants to meet with him tomorrow. Walking back to the living room, he decides to play with Fanny's emotions a little bit, provoking her to admit the infidelity herself. He goes on and on about their fairy tale-like meeting and the perfect, loyal relationship that came after, but Fanny doesn't say anything back. The thought of the past only saddens her. The contents of the meeting next morning are truly surprising. Jean seems to be hiring 2 assistants to take care of Elaine. He wants it all to go smoothly without leaving any trail behind. It is also worth noting that Jean seems not to be doing such a thing for the first time. Meanwhile, the relationship between Fanny and Elaine reaches its peak. The two are so immersed in their love that they begin seeing each other's dreams. There is no question now that Fanny wants to file for divorce. She wants to be with Elaine officially. Later that afternoon, she is working when the assassins knock on her lover's door. It goes as smoothly as planned. Two men leave Elaine's apartment building, holding an enormous, heavy bag. It is shortly after this that Fanny, clueless that something extremely tragic has happened in her life, tries to tell the truth to Jean. The latter doesn't let her do that, however. They have dinner with friends and have to go as quickly as possible. And as the body of her lover is taken far away, she is bored by Jean's snobbish friends. Consequently, later that night when they return home, she is too drunk to speak, let alone to reveal her biggest secret. The assassin informs Jean the next morning that all is taken care of, while Fanny calls Elaine after waking up. Naturally, he doesn't answer now, and he keeps not answering throughout the entire day. Jean seems to have been successful in his endeavor. Elaine has completely vanished from the face of the earth. Soon, after dozens of failed attempts to contact him, Fanny becomes worried, and she decides to go to his apartment. To her surprise, the door is left open, and to her horror, the entire place is hollow and empty. It is as if Elaine has never even lived here. Fanny is in shock. She tramps around the apartment for a while in some terrible apprehension, and then leaves to go home. That evening, her anxiety is so strong that she fails to eat anything. She is visibly desperate the next day at work too. She becomes explosive as Jean turns all his attention to loving her. In a blink of an eye, he has become a diligent, caring, and understanding husband. It isn't of any help to Fanny, however. People keep fussing over her dark mood, and it drives her crazy. The family decides to spend the last sunny days in the countryside. Walking along a sunny, peaceful meadow in the following scene, Fanny speaks with her mother. The latter can read the truth out of her daughter's forehead quite easily. She can tell that Fanny has a lover, and soon Fanny tells the entire story, starting with their fateful meeting and ending with his sudden departure. It is a classic male behavior in Suzanne's eyes. After being all poetic and passionate, Elaine vanished right after Fanny made her decision to divorce her husband for him. Fanny thinks this way too, but she still firmly believes she should divorce Jean. There is no way she can make the relationship work now. Jean comes up with a great idea. He pitches in that they should renew their marital vows, just like they do in America. Yes, it will be cheesy, but in front of a small group of friends, it will be fun to do something like that. At first, Fanny seems reluctant, but soon she starts pretending she's all for it. The ceremony goes as planned, delightfully and magnificently, but Suzanne learns something there that changes her entire perspective of the story Fanny told her earlier. Jean's friends tell her about the rumor that was mentioned at the beginning of the movie. Once, Jean went out of his way to get rid of a man for his own profit. A thought appears in Suzanne's head. He might have done the same thing in Elaine's case too. After the ceremony, Fanny feels a change, and it seems like Jean's plan is working successfully. His wife is coming back to him, and is now even ready to start discussing having kids again. She looks happy and ready to give herself to this relationship. Suzanne calls him into her room to speak privately that night. She admits that earlier today, she was told a funny story about him and his assistant, who disappeared one day. Naturally, Jean puts a lot of energy into debunk this myth passionately. Suzanne's suspicions do not seem to dissipate completely. However, she shares them with Fanny too, but the latter feels extremely guilty and wants only to make up for Jean. This is nothing but a story written by a talentless beginner writer in the thriller genre. Suzanne still looks into that case closely, however. Later that evening, she walks around the house stealthily and looks into Jean's private stuff. She finds a detective's card and realizes that her suspicions were correct. Suddenly the sound of an opening door is heard, and not to become Jean's next victim, Suzanne returns the card to its place quickly. In the following scene, as Jean shares how his day went, we learn that he saw Suzanne reading a book on her laptop at an outdoor cafe. He scared her a lot. Fanny, however, knows that her mother never reads her books on a computer. She despises that. She must have been conducting research on the case. Thankfully, Jean doesn't know anything about this trait of hers. The next day, Suzanne visits the private detective's office and speaks with the representative for a while. She lies, saying that Jean recommended this place, and that she too suspects her partner is cheating on her. After a brief conversation, she leaves with no doubt whatsoever that Jean knows about Elaine and Fanny's relationship. This plan of hers, however, proves to have terrible consequences soon. Any detective who knows his job well would clearly see Suzanne's suspiciousness. Immediately after the departure, the detective calls Jean and tells him all about this meeting. He wants to warn him, and right away, after being told the description of the woman, Jean realizes it is Suzanne. He is extremely thankful for the call. In the following scene, Suzanne reveals everything to Fanny. She begins by conveying how the doubt suddenly flickered in her head while listening to a rumor and ends with the visit to the private detective's office. Fanny connects the dots pretty easily, but after what she went through, she doesn't want to believe that Elaine was murdered. It is much easier and more convenient to believe that the man from her past was a filthy liar. Fanny is infuriated with her mother for making up such stories, especially when Fanny is about to start trying for a baby. She storms out of the cafe, and the next morning, while running outside together with Jean, she tells him about her fight with Suzanne. There is no need to clarify that Jean finds it particularly interesting to have a conversation about it. He's especially eager to know the reason for their argument, but Fanny explains all of it in vague terms, and soon Jean drops it. He's heard enough already. Later that night, Fanny checks in on Susan, hoping that the latter is over her paranoid episode. But the mother is quite confident that through the detective's investigation, Jean knew about Elaine, and just as in the case of his former associate, he decided to take care of him in the most violent manner. This time, Susan goes so far as to urge her daughter to go to the police and speak with a professional investigator. Neither Fanny nor Susan knows this, but Jean is currently standing outside overhearing this conversation. The next morning, we see him planning yet another disappearance. Naturally, we suspect who his next victim is, as he asks the assassin to make it look like an accident. He has a very elaborate plan, and this is what it sounds like. Jean will take Susan hunting, an assassin will play the role of a solo hunter who will mistake Susan for an animal and shoot it. The man says, however, that he has never shot a gun before. He doesn't even know how to use it, since he has never needed one, so Jean is forced to alter his initial plan a little bit. He'll shoot Susan himself and give the gun to him afterwards, before people arrive. In the following scene, all three, Fanny, Jean, and Susan, head over to the countryside house and, with their friends, talk about their upcoming hunting trip. When tomorrow comes, Fanny looks forward to a peaceful, soothing day at the house, but just before her husband and mother head into the forest, the latter remembers she has to take her pills. To her misfortune, she seems to have left them in Paris, and Fanny tells her not to stress over it too much. She will go back and bring them over until Susan comes back from the hunt. The autumn forest is a magnificent place. Looking for some game, the hunters walk on a certain trail. Naturally, only one of them is looking forward to shooting a deer, while the other one is searching for the place where the assassin is waiting patiently. Meanwhile, Fanny enters her apartment and finds the pills quite easily. She doesn't intend to go back to the countryside immediately after, however. First, she goes over to where Elaine used to live and has one last look around. The door is still open, and as she walks around in the room full of still freshly roaming memories, she gets an idea to open Elaine's drawers. The draft of his new book is still there. Instantly, Fanny gets insight. If he had gone away willingly, he wouldn't have forgotten to take the manuscript with him. And now, after Susan openly expressed her doubts about Jean's possible wrongdoings, she is alone with him in a dense forest. Afraid something terrible will happen, she calls Susan immediately. While the two discuss the matter of the script, Jean quietly heads over to the assassin, takes his gun, and prepares himself to finish his task. At this point, Susan says goodbye to Fanny and looks about herself in search of Jean. The sound of a loaded weapon is heard through the woods, and a shot is fired. The bullet doesn't leave Jean's gun, however. He doesn't even get to hear the gunshot, since he is the one dropping down to his knees. A great commotion is heard from nearby as a group of hunters make their way anxiously towards his body. Naturally, by the time they arrive, the assassin has already left without a trace. One of the hunters simply saw something move into the bushes, and he shot Jean by mistake. It was purely an accident. Susan is watching all of this from nearby. She's in a state of shock. Fanny reads through the ending of Elaine's book, and while remembering the memories she made with him, she looks at this entire story from a different perspective. She lost the most precious person in her life, but despite all of it, the time she spent with Elaine forced her to look at her existence as a jackpot already won.